Welcome to the Town Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Levi Wentz. Town Builders is produced by the NTBA, the National Town Builders Association, implementers of the new urbanism. Find out more at ntba.net. This podcast is sponsored by James Hardie, what the best are made of. James Hardie is America's #1 brand in siding. Their product is elegant and durable and is sure to elevate any building or development. So if you want to find out more, go to jameshardie.com or find them at your local building supplier. Hello, friends. Today on Town Builders, I sit down with Alli Thurmond Quinlan, who is the founding principal of Flintlock Lab, where she and her team provide full-spectrum design and development services. The firm is in the process of a merger where their new name will be Range, being the range of their services from interior design to master planning, from room to region. Licensed as both an architect and a landscape architect in multiple states, Alli is also a general contractor, small-scale developer, and has served in public service on her planning commission and other committees, giving her a rare combination of experience and insight, which has led her to complete a variety of complex projects across every scale. She's worked on everything from historic home remodels and small infill projects to 600-acre master plans, from drawing construction details to rewriting zoning codes and informing public policy. Alli is also the executive director of the Incremental Development Alliance, a nonprofit that's trained thousands of small developers across the country. We talk a lot about the work IncDev is doing and how it is applicable to the NTBA as they help and provide training for young developers who are doing complex projects at a small scale, and with gaining that experience, maybe be prepared well for a career in town building. Alli has an incredible story and talks candidly about her winding path that has brought her to today, leading a 20-person team of a large multidisciplinary firm. This conversation will give you a deeper appreciation for the complexity of development and what it really takes to build places that are beautiful, functional, and financially viable. But at the same time, Alli is a great example of not folding at the complexity of a thing, but instead overcoming it with a mixture of education, experience, and probably no shortage of hard work. I really hope you enjoy it, and thank you for listening to my conversation with Alli Thurmond Quinlan. You have such a breadth of knowledge and things that you've done, especially for how relatively young you are, especially in the development space, as well as, your list of what you've done. I mean, you're a licensed architect, you're a licensed landscape architect, both in multiple states. You do interior design, master planning. You're the executive director of IncDev. How much of that has been intentional? All of these different things that you've kind of brought under your umbrella. How much of it has been opportunistic and curiosity leading you down that path?
I think it's almost entirely opportunistic and sort of required to do the kind of work that I wanted to be able to do. We just kept hitting new roadblocks. You try to outsource a thing, and when you at some point can't outsource it, you learn to do it yourself. I did not intend to be doing all of those things. I had a kind of work and a kind of impact I wanted to make, and we slowly had to keep adding things to the list in order to achieve them. And there's a little graphic that we show sometimes when I speak that's like a Swiss Army knife. And it's got all the tools pulled out. And it's like architect, landscape architect, developer, finance, zoning, it's like all of sales and marketing and interiors. And it's all of these pieces. And the thing that I try to talk about as a background to that is not like, oh, look how cool it is we do all this stuff, but look how complicated housing is. Because most, town builders are just going to be familiar with having 15 consultants that do all of this stuff. Everybody is doing all of this stuff. We just got to the point we were figuring out it's really hard to coordinate all of this stuff when it's 15 different people. And it's hard. One of the things I feel really strongly about, just philosophically as a person, is really elegant solutions that work really well within the existing system. The system is kind of broken and we should be fixing it, but also you should do the best you can within it right now. And so there are a lot of those that are hard to achieve and understand if you don't know all of the requirements of 3 different systems. You can optimize each of them individually, but the solution you get will not be coordinatedly optimized for each of those systems if you have one person advocating for each. Maximizing the land planning, or maximizing the entitlements, or maximizing the architecture. You can maximize each one of those 3 things, but it isn't going to work together if you don't have one person, which is often a developer, that's trying to maximize solutions that actually work and make all 3 better. I ended up wearing a lot of hats, trying to maximize for efficiency and output and beauty, and making really wonderful, lovable places is really, really hard. I think is probably the thing that town builders are going to be able to relate to.
Well, in the center of good design is making sure that it's holistic. Mm-hmm. And then you want to be able to simplify that mm-hmm. down. But housing, as you said, is just infinitely complex. I always wonder for myself if it's sort of an Achilles heel, but I find myself, and as our company grows, just vertically integrating more and more. And yep. We're bringing more and more stuff in-house. Initially, I think our passion was as designers, but our practice was as developers. But then as we started standing up the town that we wanted to build, we realized there was no one to build it, or no one that could build it the way we really envisioned it being built. So we became builders, Yep. Now we're doing general contracting and project management, that sort of thing. But now, there's conversations of hey, there's need for really good plumbers. We could bring plumbing. You could just at
what point
keep growing it,
Yes.
And yes. I wonder how much of that is just my inability to let go and let other people mm-hmm. do the work, and how much of that is actually doing the product the justice that it needs to really be done correctly.
I think it's both. The thing that I'll weigh in from my IncDev hat is I think there's a real loss of practice in building these kinds of places. And especially in a lot of the communities where a lot of town builders are working, there aren't general contractors that you can hire. And it's not even a cost issue. It's not okay, well, if you're willing to pay, you can hire somebody that's going to do this and do a great job. In many cases, we end up vertically integrating because we try to outsource it and it's not even possible. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's some of the vertical integration that I see a lot of IncDev type developers doing, and exactly what you're talking about, right? They start as a broker and then, realize that they can't find a developer to develop this really cool property that they have this really great vision for, and somebody oughta. And so they do it. And then, they realize that, okay, well, I actually can't find a builder that understands this thing I'm trying to do. And so then they turn into a general contractor, and then, they start a property management company because they can't find somebody that can do that. So I think that if you give a mouse a cookie, vertical integration, it's actually a developer thing. And I think a lot of that is the thing I would say about developers that, I work with and love developers, and I am a developer, but also, all of our clients basically are developers, and we train nationally lots of developers. The thing about that personality, because it's a total personality that's really consistent. And it is that can-do spirit. And it is, you see a thing that could be a different thing if we can just get everything aligned. And so there is this vision behind it, but there's also this sort of funny ultimate optimism, right? And so I think that leads people to very quickly and accidentally grow companies that are big and complicated, trying to just build housing.
Well, and part of it too is maybe because it's complex, communicating your idea is really hard. So that was, I think, the initial thing with building. Not that building couldn't be handed off. And I actually want to hear your thoughts as an architect on this, because I'm sure you work with developers in this.
I'm also a general contractor.
Oh, no, I know you're also a general contractor. No, we'll get into all of this. No, because you touch on all these different things, so maybe you can help bring some light to this. But on the building thing, as I was talking about, kind of what we came to, there was even a part a year or two into starting our construction company where we're this is a ton of work, and it would really be great if we could be focusing on something else. But as we thought about we actually started to interview builders, and as we interviewed builders, we realized our standards were so high that we'd be spending probably this same amount of work just trying to manage another builder to make sure they were doing it up to our standards. It's well, then why aren't we just doing it ourselves? We'll just do it ourselves. And we kind of came back to that And now I think after we've gone through the growth spurts, I think that we're really happy we've made that decision. But there is a lot of work. And so in that, being able to be the developer and the builder, and not that we have design and architecture in house, but my sisters are actually have a architecture and design firm. So they're very close. They're very close to being in house.
Yeah.
But we've kind of been, I don't know, maybe coddled in that sense of being able to control everything start to finish, and everyone's talking across the board. But being able to communicate those details, the architecture design details and that sort of thing, that would be the part that's really hard to hand off to someone else and just trust to someone else, because there's so many details that how do you encapsulate all that and communicate that properly?
I completely see that. And I think that's one of the other reasons, we have accidentally vertically integrated, and the new brand, some of the new name came from, I loved that it's a landscape word, right? So the range, I grew up out on the range, but it also, Rob and I design everything, the full range of things from like room to region. And some of that it's hard to even describe the thing that you're trying to do, no matter how much documentation you have, no matter what the drawings say, no matter how well you've explained it, no matter how many walkthroughs you've done, no matter how small and simple the project is, it's just really hard to get somebody else to care the same amount that you do about the outcomes. And some of my background too, right, is I started out, I am, you mentioned I'm relatively young, kind of in the developer sphere. And some of that is I started early. I went to college when I was 16, and I put my college fund into real estate and bought a fixer-upper when I was 16. I was too young to live in the dorms, fixed up a house all through college, and did all the work myself. I had grown up. My mom was the daughter of a doctor and had never lived in a small town, and had been like a debutante. And then my dad moved her out to the ranch that I grew up on. It's been in my family since the 1890s. Giant. It's like 12 square miles. And she was a cattle rancher's wife all of a sudden. And it was the height of the oil boom. There's nobody to hire to do anything. So she got a couple of books and learned how to do electrical work, and learned how to do plumbing, and re-roofed the house. And there's this pivotal to my family, our lore photo of her up re-roofing the house pregnant with me.
Awesome.
I grew up in this household where you just figured it out, and none of this is rocket science, right? She'd come out of being a nurse and ended up roofing. And so I fixed up the house, all through school, and then flipped houses that I lived in, through architecture school and through graduate school, landscape architecture. And then through my first few years working post Great Recession, started working in multifamily and big complicated entitlement projects. I was in DC, and, so was doing big luxury condo buildings where every suite had to be able to fit a full-size grand piano in it. And then
this is a firm in DC that you're working.
I was working for a big firm.
Yeah.
So, I had that traditional architecture entry point. I was one of the first people hired back after the 2008 crash. I was young and cheap, and I just drew stair sections for 6 months. Just, they would change the floor to floor heights by 6 inches, and the entire stair core would have to be redrawn in detail. And got an appreciation. It was a great firm, and had a good appreciation for constructability and what it takes to think about how, I jokingly say now, a hungover 22-year-old in the field is going to build this in 95-degree heat. And you have to draw a thing that guy can achieve. You have to not assume perfection in terms of conditions.
It's totally hypothetical.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not based on many, many days, on site, seeing who is building stuff. And you have to be kind to them. You have to think about the way it's going to go together and give them something that is achievable. But at the same time, we had inclusionary zoning that we were addressing. And so we also had deeply affordable units in apartments on the same project. And if you live in Bethesda, I bet you can guess what this building is. I know there's people all over here, but so it's 2 big towers. One of them is a luxury condo building. One of them is an affordable tower. And it's built over a parking garage that spans both sites. And then there's a 7-lane public street that diagonally runs across the parking garage between the 2 buildings. And so the structural coordination all the way up from the parking garage into the buildings, I worked for 2 years on the buildings. And I actually think a lot of our small product is based on having started in apartments and condos, and you got to make every square inch work. And then, the parking garage, left and started working for the landscape architecture firm that was doing the landscape outside the building. I got scalped. Huh. So then I did all the street trees and public infrastructure and stormwater on top of a parking garage that looks like a street. And so like these big, complicated projects then gave me a really good understanding of how much complexity there is between consultants and how much can get lost in translation between lots of different, very specialized consultants. So I think that was also, I think that weighs in on my vertical integration feelings of just understanding that we can, by providing vertically integrated services, right, for new towns and infill projects, we do both. We do big scale to small scale, right? We've got a project right now that's 4 cottages on a half acre in town, and then we've got a project that's like a 600 acre master plan we're working on. It's so much more affordable and efficient to have 10 people working on it all in the same company instead of 25 people working on it in 10 different offices, and did that update on the demo plan get incorporated in the civil drawings that went into the city. The city has approved something that doesn't have the trees that are coming off that we need. And so we can't put the storm line there, right? And it's like you're constantly chasing these threads of information to produce these multi-year projects that are so complicated.
Right.
And even at the small scale, I don't actually think it's exponentially less complicated. You still have all the same steps. You have less economy of scale to be able to pay to have all the experts that you should need to be able to put it together. But I think that's one thing that I'll weigh in on, defending kind of incremental developers is their work and what's ahead of them is as challenging and sometimes more so than big master planned towns where you've had to weigh in on all this stuff. Because a lot of times you're coming in for infill projects on very strange, imperfect existing conditions.
Right. Yeah. You have to work a lot with what you have there. But I think another thing of what you're talking about that's really helpful for developers is when you're coordinating across multiple firms, the developer is the one that has to hold all of these horses in line and make sure nothing is falling through the cracks and making sure everyone is communicating, which is extremely difficult with the amount of details that are going on. So having someone that is also shouldering the burden of managing all the details and making sure the vision is coming through is really, really important. Town Builders is brought to you by Brett Jones, PA. Brett is a practicing land use lawyer in Florida, and as a patron and advocate for new urbanism, he leverages his background in corporate law and personal development experience to help landowners and developers get entitlements and cut through red tape to build human-centric, walkable neighborhoods. Visit brettjonespa.com to find out more. Was that experience working with the landscape architect what pushed you into getting your master's in landscape architecture?
I finished my master's. So
You'd already finished your master's?
Yeah, I did the 5-year architecture program undergrad and then did a 2-year postgraduate landscape degree. And so I had both degrees and was working and getting licensed when I switched from the architecture firm. The landscape firm also had a much easier commute, 10-minute commute, not an hour and a half commute. But it was also 2008, so you took the job you could get.
I was going to say, coming out of college, having your architecture license and your landscape architecture license, and you're drawing stair sections for, 6 months. You're like, I'll get what I can,
Absolutely. Would you like a job? Yes, at any price. It doesn't matter. I am young and we'll just take a job.
So what did that turn into after working in DC? Because now you're in Fayetteville. I don't know if people caught what you were talking about earlier, but Flintlock Lab is your company that you've had and you're merging it into a new company called Range. You're up at 20 employees now. So what's that journey been like going from, I know you worked for a while as a sole proprietor into now you have a large firm and you're doing all of these different projects?
I somewhat suddenly moved, had a good opportunity to move to Arkansas in 2011, I think, and moved here, worked for the university for a little bit. And then I worked for a big regional bank, which seemed, I think, to friends of mine when I took the job, like I was throwing my career away. Like the architecture's so boring. And, it's like prototype management. So I was an owner's rep for a bank that is owned by the wealthiest family in maybe the world. Got to work relatively closely with them, which was fun. One of them was still pretty active in the leadership of the bank at the time. I came out of a banking family. And so I thought that part of it was really interesting. And so, I had to take all the required finance trainings as a bank employee, but was managing $30 to $50 million in construction a year of like boring branch ATMs and like little bank branches and, not anything that any of us would like get excited about. But, it was new construction, entitlement oversight, land purchase, due diligence, full kind of development support to bank presidents in their regions. And then we did a lot of renovations too. So this bank grows by acquisitions. And so they'd buy 56 Bank of Americas where they hadn't even been changing the light bulbs because they knew they were going to sell the building and the accounts in big packages that weren't announced until like a very formal close date. And then you had 90 days to fully rebrand the building. And so we did crash course renovations overnight. And so the logistics experience and the contract experience was awesome. And I did it because I was trying to get the last hours to get licensed. And they had an architect and a landscape architect on staff. And so I could get both sets of hours at the same time. And so I did that for 3 years while I was finishing, because the architecture license and the landscape license don't overlap. So it's a completely different set of exams and set of intern hours and process. And so it took a minute to like get all of those together, but it gave to a really fun regional experience of like, I was driving sometimes 2,000 miles a week. I had to be on site actively at each of our active construction sites and, city council meetings for rezonings or variances for projects that we had coming through in a 4-state area. So again, I was 24, 25 and was signing crazy construction contracts and negotiating stuff. It was like, I'm surprised they gave me.
Right.
But it was really fun and was a really good experience of, again, like complexity and that integration of coming up with solutions that worked for 5 different needs was the only way to get anything done, that you couldn't optimize for lots of different things separately. And so then the second I had my licenses, I went out on my own. And so it was 2015, started a company called Flintlock. Arkansas was different than it was. I was young, I was female, I needed a gun name as my company name. And I have said since, like at some point our logo went pink and I bought a pink building that our office went in. And I felt like we didn't need the tough name anymore. And it's interesting, I don't know, I might again. But, we started hiring staff with another female architect. We shared staff. We shared an office for a couple of years. She passed away suddenly in 2018. And so I somewhat inherited having a firm. In 2019, October of 2019, inherited 6 employees, a whole second firm's worth of projects, a building that we had purchased together and had not yet renovated. And I had a 10-month-old at the time. And so had to make it work. Had a couple of months of getting everything figured out, making all the phone calls. I think that's the thing that I always see when I see that somebody has passed away is thinking about their business partner having to make a phone call to every single client to say it to them over and over again is just absolutely brutal. That's the thing I want you guys to
relive it again and again.
Yeah, it's the most brutal day. But we got all these projects figured out, took on what we could. We had a couple of pretty complicated ones, restaurants that didn't have fire sprinklers, that didn't have access to fire lines to even get fire sprinklers and lots of complicated stuff to negotiate. And then it was COVID. And I was on the CNU jury February 25th of 2020. And it was my last trip that I took. I'd been traveling a lot with IncDev. I was an IncDev faculty member at the time. I traveled about once a month. I had my daughter and had been traveling with her and with me. And we were in DC doing that awards jury and went home and didn't leave again for, however many months that was. And I had a fully remote team at the time because we had a lot of young parents and we had a lot of non-traditional employees. So people that were coming back to work, having been stay at home, people who had new babies. There were 7 of us at the time. And so we already had a fully remote setup and we all were used to working asynchronously already. And so COVID hit and our business doubled that year because we were getting lots of referrals from other people that weren't able to make the switch to work from home. And their server wasn't set up for this. And everybody had a desktop that they needed to take home. And
right.
So we really managed and thrived in that 2020 year and started doing a lot more master planning and entitlement. I was on the planning commission too in Fayetteville for a number of years. And so got used to writing zoning codes and understanding how the politics around zoning works. And so we started doing more complicated entitlements. And we started doing what I call our gateway drug urbanism, where we'll take new greenfield developments by developers who might not qualify to be NTBA members, but who are building an enormous volume of housing in America. in ways that I think most of NTBA's members are probably not very excited about. And one of the things that I really leaned into is I've got a company ethos that is, we build really beautiful, lovable, walkable, dense places that are economically, socially resilient to protect wild places and agricultural lands from sprawl. I grew up in this beautiful agricultural environment. We're just like ruining all of our best places with junky, cookie cutter houses. Mm-hmm. But also the pattern of those places, the pattern of our new places is the stickiest part of all of them, right? The roads in London are still where the Romans put them, even though the whole city has been torn down and burned down and like is a ship of Theseus, right? Where no part of it is still what was there, but the roads are still in the same place. California just burned. The roads are going back and the parcel lines are sticky even when the built environment is gone. And so we leaned into trying to say, okay, we'll help them entitle it. We'll make it more dense. We usually add about 30 to 40% more units, even if it's their product. We're not super excited about it. Just by being more efficient in side yard setbacks. And how does the underground electric work? And where are the transformers? And can we get the utilities stacked a little bit more efficiently? And, can we negotiate this custom street section that's a little bit narrower? How can we bring the better pattern and connectivity and lot dimensions, even if we just give up on okay, we can't get the houses there yet?
So this sounds like you working with national builders or maybe even regional builders, but at a much larger scale, which I agree that a lot of the town builders are people that have a dream. It's probably a very similar audience to the IncDev. You have a vision, something, and someone like Casey Roloff, has just poured himself, all the places that we love to go visit that we could name. It's like someone's poured themselves into that place, but it's not really repeatable in some way. And I think that's a question a lot of people are asking is, how do we create a model of town building that is repeatable?
Yeah. And how do we scale this?
And how do we scale it? So working with the national builders, they have their way of doing things. They're rigid. How do those conversations go in you trying to push for density, push for these little things? Are they listening to you? How much convincing do you have to do? What are those conversations?
It is a couple of regional builders, but we've also worked with some of the, biggest kind of national builders that there are. And we don't over-explain it, if I'm being really honest. I take my lessons, right? Because I think there's this thing that you're talking about, right? Where Casey is such a good example, right? Rob with Trilla.
Yeah.
These places that are just perfect, right? And when I do development on my own, I'm a baby developer. We don't do big stuff, but we've bought land and done infrastructure and entitlement and built new construction. And it's every little detail is perfect. Every little rafter tail and, the planting is just so. The wallpaper in the powder rooms is great. I joke though, and I've said this a couple times in a meeting and I've gotten some really varying responses to this, but my philosophy is to achieve a place like that, which we all love and we all agree is excellent. You have to have somebody that's just kind of like a psycho.
Yeah.
And I say that lovingly as the person that has been the psycho on those projects, but you have to have somebody that cares about every detail. You have to have somebody that is going to make them take that door back out because they framed the opening too small and they've ripped 2 inches off one side of the door and the stiles are no longer symmetrical. You have to have a person that is going to make them take the water line back out because it's 4 feet off of where it's supposed to be and it's going to wreck our whole set of street trees for this block. And you have to have somebody over decades that is every day waking up, showing up, and being a psycho for the future good.
And you go to a spot like that and it's very noticeable. I always explain it like it feels like it's alive in some sense, like someone has left a part of themselves there. And it's haunted in the best possible way.
Yes. And I think simultaneously to saying we should keep making those places. When we have the resources, when we have the teams, when we find the land at the price that it works, we should continue to voraciously lean into being the people that can create that place because it's so hard and it's so important and that place will be special forever. And we simultaneously have to say, not every place is going to be like that. While we're spending all that time and energy building excellence, there are hundreds of thousands of acres of units that are getting laid out in a complete opposite pattern. And so it's not one or the other, I guess is my philosophy. Right. I think we have to be making the not our towns better. And I pitched this number somewhat. capriciously. We generally will say if we can make a project 25% better than it would have been otherwise, and if it would have happened otherwise, right, then we can feel good. It's probably not going on the website, but we can feel good about taking that on and doing it and making it better. For me, better is better street pattern and grid, better mixed unit types, not having a monoculture of units, better integration of, often we can convince people to do commercial outlots, even if it's not in their business pattern at all to own commercial.
Right.
We can pull off commercial and help that get flipped to somebody that can do commercial in a competent way. If we can make it a little bit better, if the street trees can be better, right? If we can improve on it, then it doesn't have to be perfect because it's a different thing than the perfect town. And I love a perfect town. I'm there to do the land planning and write all the zoning code for it and get it entitled and be there for years as a town architect. And I'm going to love every single moment of it. We're going to design the houses, right? We're going to do all the interiors. We're going to think about sales and marketing and do focus groups. And right, like we have projects that we do the whole start to finish and love it. And I think that can't be the only thing we're doing, is my philosophy.
Well, if you're a perfectionist, then you're never going to get anything done. It's like the person that says development is bad for the environment, so we're not going to improve this development. It's like, well, this is a very environmentally friendly development and it's going to get developed. So wouldn't you rather have this than something else? Because you can't just play it black and white like that.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the nice things about the space that we're in is that there are people attacking it from a lot of different perspectives. There's the strong towns folks doing what they're doing. There's the IncDev folks. And I think that's a little bit of the mindset in which you're approaching this, is just like, if we can just make it a little better. There's a lot of bleeding that's happening. I do see the NTVA folks as kind of out on the, there's several fronts, but one front of trying to create a new model for greenfield development. And hopefully it's a model that can be picked up and repeated across the board. And hopefully it becomes a predominant model that's used, because we're going to need to keep on developing. And so let's make sure that it's good development while the IncDev folks come back through and retrofit suburbia and do all the things that you guys are doing so well. But we need anything we can get at this point,
Yeah, we need all of it. And I think that's the thing about the housing crisis, is we spent 100 years trying to make it really hard to build housing and build new places. And now it's really hard to build housing and build new places. And so we need all of these approaches, and we need all of these approaches that are cross-informing one another. I would say I think I skimmed a little bit past your direct question, which was, how do we convince a traditional builder to do something a little bit different? And for us, it's a complete financial conversation with them, right? We can get them more units. We can get them 30 to 40% more unit yield, often with a lower overall mass grading and infrastructure cost, usually about 20% less linear footage of infrastructure within the neighborhood. And often we can get something entitled that they otherwise wouldn't be very successful. It would take 6 months longer to get their entitlements on it, which in Arkansas, right, is double the time. In some other places is a rounding error.
Yeah.
But a lot of my time on planning commission and my time, being a nerd about zoning codes and building codes, I think IncDev is one of the things that taught me, early on, the importance of understanding code thresholds and code loopholes and how codes work and what you can do. But figuring out how you market it, how you finance it, how you get the zoning that produces these practical, livable places is really important on the back end. But for us, we're just talking to them about making more money faster. And so the fact that they're making a better place, they don't have to get fully bought in to make a better place. And so I think there's sometimes that's a great, rich conversation and goes really well. And there's sometimes we don't over-explain how and why we're getting a little bit better diversity of units. But even a lot of times, they've got a home building arm. A lot of the big development companies that we have worked with have a land development company that is separate from the home building company, right? That is separate from, some of them have their own banks and they do all their own mortgages, right? They're very vertically integrated also. We can't introduce IBC buildings to them. They cannot do a mixed use commercial town center. They might be able to parcel out some offices, though, as a liner to a front entry that they're parceling, they're designing, we're putting some design codes on, and then they're parceling out to a commercial developer. So figuring out ways to package it for them in an achievable, bite-sized way that works within their existing systems and priorities is the way that we've made that work.
How much of this is Incremental Development Alliance, which you're the executive director of? I think one thing that you guys are doing well, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're putting out a lot of resources for small scale developers, how to get started as a developer. And I think putting out a lot of good resources. And I think that there are things that the NTBA, as we're looking at what's next for the town building movement, is that we haven't been able to create a model out of it. There's a lot of really, really incredible people doing amazing projects. But at least the question that I've been asking myself is, okay, how do we get this repeatable? And I think that there's a number of people that I've talked to that, like yourself, have been able to prove in a financial model that new urbanism, if we dare say the word, I don't know if it ever comes up as kind of like a word you try to avoid because it puts ideas in people's heads of like, no, that's not.
They have an expectation of the amount of, they would say, gingerbread they need on the front of the buildings that they're not comfortable with.
Right. So I think talking about it in a way of like, hey, there's a model of development that is cheaper, more beautiful. People love it. You know, we can talk about the marketability of walkability and all of these different wonderful things. And that is really valuable to entice new developers to start building this way. I think that's mainly been architects that have been able to quantify some of this, but being able to put it all together, I think would be really helpful for people and also helpful for existing NTBA members that are working to get developments, want to do the next development and have a hard time going in and getting either financing or whatever it may be. Or it might even be talking with city members about, hey, we want an affordable, we want more affordable housing. It's like, hey, great, here's this affordable style development and this is how it's affordable.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think it's the same thing that IncDev is and has been struggling with too, is how we get people to stop to tell the story of what's going on and what's happening and how to do the data and then roll it out in a way that is usable by somebody else. It's really challenging to get developers to stop and explain the case study, explain the thing that they tested, show some metrics, provide you with their numbers while they're thinking about them. It's something that, and as a little bit of a backstory, I do have a full-time job as running a firm. I have 2 little kids. I am also the executive director of a nonprofit. Accidentally, I was on the board. Our executive director was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was the only person that had enough of a back of house company structure to be able to take on the organization, sort of volunteer. And that was 2 years ago. And we used the title interim executive director for about 18 months. And I stopped saying interim at some point a few months ago. And we've got a really good staff that is in-house in our office that is absolutely killing it at running IncDev. And that part has been really satisfying. It's also our 10th year. So I started Flintlock 10 years ago, and we're merging with another company, as we talked about earlier, Rob Sharp's architecture firm, and his team is joining ours under the new label Range. But IncDev is also having its 10-year anniversary. And we've had a lot of rethinking and strategic planning on both organizations and how to have the biggest impact. How do we get a good ROI on the efforts that we're all making? And one of the things that IncDev still can, one of the things that we've done well on a small scale, I want to say too. And if you're not familiar with IncDev, I want you to be, we've got great presence online. Reach out to me and email me. I would love to get more NTBA established developers engaged in mentoring younger, smaller developers. I think that IncDev is a big tent organization that probably is a good feeder for future NTBA members and employees. And, there's some really great partnerships that are possible. But we are a big tent organization. So we've trained a little over 9,000 small developers and what we call ecosystem partners in the last 10 years in 33 states. We just added Alaska this week. And about a third of the people that we train are developers or build something within the next 2 years. And so that's about 3,000 people. The other 2/3 we get mayors and city council members and planning directors and planning staff, bankers and appraisers and architects and engineers. And we're trying to train them all about the housing and development ecosystem. So here's how pro formas work. Here's how zoning code works. Here's how all of this works together. Here's how you program a building. Here's when a building needs to be IRC. Here's when it's IBC. Here's what that means, cost per square foot difference. We make planners run through pro formas on the kinds of projects that they say they want in their town with their zoning codes, which is, I will be honest, a little mean, but it's always a really good teaching experience. And we're really trying to teach people how to get the outcomes that they want within a pretty broken system in most local towns, while simultaneously trying to work on fixing the system. We're creating advocates for, changes to existing zoning code and building code. We've had some alumni and staff and faculty take state zoning code reforms through. We've had 3 successful bills that we've contributed to in 3 different states. We had 2 bills that we took through last year as contributors that we were not successful yet, but we're reintroducing both next year. So we do a lot of that kind of work, right? We're a nonprofit. We're advocating for big picture rebuilding of communities by locals in a long-term view. And we've done really good job on small scale, taking each one of those wins and calibrating. Okay, so what's one of our alumni got a bill through in Tennessee to move, 4 to 6 unit buildings under the International Residential Code. It was the first state that had done that. The compromise that got made was we had a 2-hour firewall in that bill instead of a 1-hour firewall like a duplex would have. Mm-hmm. So then one of our senior faculty members built some multifamily buildings in Chattanooga that had been part of an IncDev kind of pre-packaged development program that we did, I think in 2016. I think IncDev did their first pre-approved program, more or less, in 2016. I did one as Flintlock with Rob, actually, as subconsultants. In 2017, we did some ADU packages, which is that same idea. How do we take the work we're doing, making something good, and scale it? And maybe it's a little less perfect, but we're getting more of it done. And so some of those first buildings that got designed in 2016 then were built in Chattanooga. Some of them were built with a 2-hour firewall, no fire sprinklers. Some of them were built with fire sprinklers to full IBC. Same buildings, same time, same builders. And so then we could get really deep cost information. What is the cost savings of the way that this bill is structured? The 2-hour firewall is pushing you into a commercial contractor in a lot of cases, which is actually the problem of multiplexes that are small being built under IBC is you need a commercial contractor because a residential contractor just doesn't know how to do the details. So they cost about the same. We got to this point that we were like, okay, so you don't have to get fire sprinklers. You save some steps. You save insurance costs long-term because we're starting to see, we can get broad data because we've got lots of people that own lots of different buildings and lots of markets. We're starting to see insurance rates rise higher for buildings that have fire sprinklers because insurance companies are seeing bigger losses from fire sprinkler accidental discharges than they are from fires.
Oh, interesting.
And so there's some long-term benefits, I think, but that informed faculty took through as supporters a bill in North Carolina that brought it down to a 1-hour firewall between units. And so we're taking some of that, okay, we got this done, which is what had to get done to do this one. Now let's test that. What's the data actually showing us? How do we then implement that in a better version next time? And that kind of calibration, I think NTBA is hugely cited to be the only people that can collect that kind of informed data. What percentage above market price per square foot are we seeing our houses marketed at over the new construction stuff that's next door? What is our infrastructure, cost? What is our lot cost? What's our cost to deliver a finished lot, not including land value in this pattern? We could start to get to some very granular data that starts to make a really big difference.
Right.
But you've got to slow everybody down enough to get their paperwork out of them at the time they're doing it, and it's very hard.
Now, the NDBA is full of a bunch of psychos, as you kindly say.
I said it with love, as a fellow psycho.
You understand part of the thing that I try to, in defending other developers as well, that don't slow down to design things the right way or whatever it may be. It's an extremely stressful job having the burden of interest on your back just pushes you further and further, just faster and faster. And so being able to slow down and quantify some of these things would be very helpful. And I think there's other things. Yep. Again, I'm speaking so much of my own experience because I'm relatively new to the NTBA and we're in our first year of building our neighborhood. But one of the things that I've noticed that's great about the roundtables is that people are able to come there and it's peer-to-peer and you're sharing information. That was part of putting out this podcast was, okay, well, all those great conversations that happen at the roundtables, let's try to record some of them so I can listen to them back again and again because there's so much valuable information that's shared. And I think that with all the valuable information that's shared, someone needs to start cataloging this stuff. I want to take a moment to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Harvey Points. Harvey Points are architectural designers that have worked on new urbanist projects nationwide. With a blend of bold ideas and thoughtful design, they have experienced site planning everything from infill projects in pocket neighborhoods to master planned communities. During the site planning process, they develop floor plans that tailor fit to each lot, giving you a comprehensive plan to take forward. They also provide realistic 3D renderings that help the whole team visualize the project from early stages, as well as being a great tool to get city planners and council members on board to approve your new development. We all want to see more unique communities built, and Harvey Points would love to assist you in that pursuit. Visit their website, harveypoints.com, that's Harvey with a B, or follow them on Instagram at Harvey Points. There's stuff from IncDev that I want to start looking at as we move to like our commercial retail space. I want to figure out how to make small maker spaces. This is a part of town that doesn't have anything going in it because it's greenfield. It's not like a rundown brownfield area, but I think it's the same idea. It's like, how do I keep costs super low? I'm going to be really involved with the retailers that go in there. I'm going to be helping them do sales and marketing and making sure that they understand the vision and all that sort of stuff. And it's probably a very similar, I got the idea from listening to Monty talk about it actually. Lots of what he's doing in South Dallas, but it's like, that's the type of involvement that it takes to do that. And I think a lot of the town builders are involved in that same way in just doing whatever they can to try to stand up their project. And I think that, I want to start looking to IncDev a little bit more for some of the resources you guys are providing there.
IncDev too is it's as much a mindset and a philosophy as it is an organization, right? We've an executive director and two full-time staff members, but like IncDev, to me, IncDev is the people that are doing work this way. It is people who are incrementally developing. And so, it's not like a big top-down organization. It is all of these people out doing things all day, every day. And it's one of the things that's really satisfying about, I've been a faculty member for 10 years. I spent a lot of years on the road traveling, teaching for IncDev. And it's so satisfying. Every community that you go to in America has a fellow psycho, said with love, that is sitting and building cottage clusters and ADUs and townhouses and is rezoning stuff and is on their city council and is rehabbing historical buildings and is getting restaurants started and is doing adaptive reuse. And every place that you go, you can find people deeply engaged in the same work with the same philosophy. And they don't have to be a member and, have gone to a training, and like they're doing it. They're doing the work. This is a practice. Right? It's not perfection. And so the thing that we're really trying to do is expand that mindset that lots of people have of how do I invest in a place that I care about, that I love, that loves me back long term? And how do I do a number of projects that each feed into the value and the improvement of the next one? And how do I think about it as community building? How do I think about it as building places for people, not just real estate? So we're trying to teach people to be more disciplined, to, do a pro forma, do side-by-side pro formas. I sat in a meeting this morning with a small developer who, we were looking at 2 different alternate programs for a site and was like, I don't know, which one should I pick? And I was like, well, what's the pro forma say? And he was like, well, I didn't do one yet. And so we're, I'm pulling up a pro forma and we're doing a really quick pro forma in the room to be like, okay, but like, you can't just use your vibes. This is real, and we need to do a perform on this. It's that level, I think, of things that IncDev is really bringing to the table. That there are so many NTBA developers who could be deeply contributing in really valuable ways to people being able to grow from small scale, because small scale infill is absolutely brutally hard, into the longer term, bigger kinds of projects that lots of town builders are doing. And I also think that there's a really great opportunity when you've got a good cohort of incremental developers adjacent to a new town. Those are phenomenal new people to be partnering with, to sell lots to let them develop some pieces of this. There's some really great potential opportunities for knowledge transfer between the two organizations and approach transfer. That there's lots of things that the incremental developers, who typically have to be very scrappy and very efficient, and they have to have very good ROI on the work that they do and the money that they spend. We tell people build really simple boxes, not because everything should be cheap, but because we need you to save some money to like put in solid core doors and good hardware. But the other thing that IncDev, I think, does bring that could really inform some of the new towns is everything is done on a shoestring. And it tends to be unsubsidized, and it tends to be pretty affordable. We tend to produce naturally occurring affordable housing or attainable workforce housing without subsidy in traditionally financeable projects that can be done with relatively low down payment equity. And so I think there's some really good experienced small developers nationally that have very good experience in doing like the hardest version of this.
Well, it's so incredible too, because the barriers into development can be hard, but especially town building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to be in the position that I am and being able to practice that. But I mean, one, there's experience, and then of course the big one is access to capital.
Yep.
I think we were joking before this about find your billionaire, finding the patient money. There's a lot of capital that goes into building a new town. But what's super valuable as well is experience. A lot of people learn on the job. And so being able to look at the incremental development folks that are doing projects at a smaller scale. I think Trump said this in maybe The Art of a Deal or something like that, but he's like, it takes the same amount of effort to do a $10 million deal and a $100 million deal. You're just adding an extra zero, but it's essentially the same work. And that's what you're saying. Even the incremental development folks can run into a lot more issues doing brownfield work because there's a lot of oftentimes underlying issues that happen. And so I love that idea of being able to have some sort of a feeder program because there's lots of developers in IncDev that are getting very valuable development experience.
I think there's also a great opportunity for, I know that there are some towns that are starting to also feel wrapped up. There are some of the towns in the NTBA world that like big multi-decade projects are starting to feel a little bit more complete. And so I also want to encourage the NTBA crew to be thinking about how impactful patient capital could be deployed in a broader way to small developers. Because I also think one of the things that we see, we primarily train in cohorts. Lone small developers get burned out really easily. If you don't have somebody to call and be like, oh my God, planning is making me do this. Have you had to do this? What do we do about this? My electrician just backed out. Do you have somebody? If you don't have a cohort that you're working in your community, it's tough. We see much faster attrition rates of small developers becoming former developers when they're trying to work alone. So we really promote training in collaborative cohorts. So they're typically not in business together. They're not doing projects together, but they're working in the same neighborhoods with the same ethos in a collaborative way. Sometimes they flip deals back and forth to each other. Sometimes they partner up on things. Sometimes they're giving some cross references, but generally it's sort of side by side work. And in those cohorts, they've got to a new town, patient capital. They've got really quick turn on their deals. It's really good deal flow because they're able to buy something and have it stabilized in 24 to 36 months in a lot of cases. They tend to be land that couldn't be developed at scale, right? And so a cohort of small developers can tackle lots of infill lots that are not appealing to somebody at a bigger scale. And they're putting in sweat equity because the thing that they can bring to the table as an operating partner is an enormous amount of local relationship and kind of know-how and hustle. 50% of the people that we train on average are women or developers of color, and they're often working in formerly redline neighborhoods. Appraisals are tough. Nobody has, a parent to write a check for them. They are scraping together equity to put deals together their first couple of times. And they're really competent developers, and they're only able to keep doing it because they're really competent, disciplined developers.
Yeah, I want to hear more and explore that idea. Changing topics just a little bit, you've had experience on the planning commission and working a lot with city government.
Mm-hmm.
What's your advice towards people wanting how can we better pursue that private-public partnership model as developers and get away from the hostility that sometimes occurs in those settings? Because I think that ultimately developers and cities should have the same vision of creating a better city, creating a better place. But so often differences in vision create that hostility. So your experience, what's your advice and where do you see people get that wrong?
I would say one of the things that I have found most valuable about working with IncDev is that coming in as a nonprofit that's being brought in by the city lets us make recommendations to cities that like developers could never make and get taken seriously. We're a neutral third party, right? And often we're their consultant. The first question is, what do you want to see more of, right? What kinds of housing and development do you want as a city? Okay, what are you getting right now? Okay, let's look and see where the problem lies. And so we do stress tests for cities. That's one of the things that IncDev has done long term, where we come in and say, what do you want? All right, what are you getting? Okay, well, let's make you a checklist of all of the ways that you've made what you want illegal. Here are all of the extra ways that you're making it hard, even outside of how it's illegal. And so we started with kind of a stress test model. I think Kalamazoo and South Bend were some of the first cities that those happened in. And those are really rolled. That's still a standard offering for IncDev. We also have a number of faculty and former faculty who are really working directly with cities, learning from that model of how useful it is to work directly in with a city as their consultants, that you can make significantly more inroads when a city is coming to you saying, we want to fix stuff. So, with Eric Kronberg Urbanist and Architects, who's another NTBA member.
Right.
We're working with Union Studios as well. We worked with Jennifer Griffin in Tulsa. We've got a number of pre-approved plans programs that we've been doing. We've done some regional ones. We've done some local and city ones in a couple of states in the last 4 or 5 years, learning from our ADU pre-approved program. And those have been really useful. The plans are like the easy part. We could produce some plans for somebody pretty quickly. We're all architects. We also are all developers. So all of our firms, the thing that feels special about why we're friends and work together in that way is we're all architects who have also developed our own work. And so we draw this like deeply practical building that is beautiful and marketable, but also like we would build and own. And so our catalogs, the easy part, 90% of the work of those projects is coming in and meeting with the building department and asking them to make a flow chart of what the permit process looks like and what codes they're enforcing and who looks at what on the permit plans. What's our entitlement process? What are the lot split rules like? Are there loopholes? Who is looking at those? We do a full zoning code analysis and say, okay, well, here are the 10 recommendations of things that we need to change. And the pre-approved plans themselves are sort of like a Trojan horse coming in to say, okay, well, we'll give you really cute buildings, but here's the 10 things you have to fix to make that happen. And that political approach has, we got there like a lot of other things because the other thing we were trying wasn't working. We have also really encouraged IncDev alumni and members to infiltrate their own city governments, which is really practical if you're going to be working in a place long term. You need to do your service. You need to be on one of the boards that you are, showing up and learning the ropes and learning the codes and making the relationships. Make it a volunteer one, Construction Board of Appeals, your Board of Adjustments, Planning Commission, but getting appointed to a board and then putting in the work, right? Your local town is run by people that will show up to very boring meetings over and over and over again. And so if you are willing to be that person, you can have some really good change, but that takes years and consensus building.
Right.
And so in the yes and, I think working directly with cities and working with cities and towns that want something different, that have a really good mayor, that have a really functional city council, a city manager that cares about this.
Make sure that there's ears to hear.
Yeah, don't beat your head up against the wall.
I just need to try harder. I'm not saying the right words where it's like there could just be ears are closed.
Yeah, and that's, in part of we talk about farming, right? IncDev, that you have to find your farm, find a place that you love that loves you back. And that's what we mean by the loves you back. Find a place that wants something similar to what you're proposing doing and understands that there's a reason they're not getting it and is willing to work with you. The other approach that is newer, that I think is going to have some good success, but I can't report back on yet, is we've got two faculty members in North Carolina who are working on a faith-based housing initiative. So they helped support a bill through that legalized ADUs on every faith-based organization's land statewide with no zoning changes, unlimited accessory dwelling units. So we've got a similar program in Northwest Arkansas that I was with last week. And I also think making churches developers, they have so much land, they have no money. They're a wonderful contribution partner that could be getting great long-term income from housing that they own, that could be very mission forward. And in many red states, the kinds of places that many of our new towns are built, there will be very little that is as compelling as showing up with most of the congregation of a local church to talk about why specific zoning code changes are needed at your city council meeting in order to build mission forward housing. So I also think our faith-based housing initiatives have some very good grassroots advocacy options. And I think we partnered with 2 different EMD groups before, trying to say, how do we partner the energy and advocacy and number of bodies showing up at public meetings that YIMBY is bringing to the table with the technical expertise of incremental developers who can weigh in on exactly what we should be asking for. And so I think a lot of those cross-organizational partnerships are also going to be really important.
Yeah, no, the faith-based housing thing is a topic that's just come up multiple times in the last year. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to see what's happening there. And as far as how it plays into new towns, I'm trying to think about that right now because we've had in the last several months had 3 different churches ask us about land. Mm-hmm. And we're like, we don't really have it planned into the master plan right now, but the value of getting a tenant like, quote unquote tenant like that or in the town. I mean, the cultural effect that they bring in the body of people they bring with them would certainly bring a lot of life. So we're trying to think through that right now and how to work that into our plan.
They're also the ideal parking sharing tenant. Like there's nothing better for parking sharing agreements than a church because they need so much parking and they use it like 3 hours a week.
Right.
Churches that do childcare, also 10 of 10 would recommend, right? And so churches that are really leaning into providing community amenities is not the way that they would say it, but it's the way that we might think about it, right? How are we finding those partnerships that are building community, that are adding to the experience of living here, that are really inviting to, I think the thing that I will say gently and lovingly, because I think the thing that new towns will continue to be challenged by is making everyone feel welcome. And so how do we make sure that the faith-based institutions that we're partnering with are, because when they do that well, there's nobody better. When they don't do that well, that can be really challenging. And so how do we really challenge ourselves to make sure we're filtering for a welcoming, community additive organization?
Right. Just taking you back a little bit and taking off the IncDev hat and putting on your small scale developer hat. Mm-hmm. There's one thing in working with cities as they reach out to you and have you come in as a consultant to help them with a specific problem. But if you're going in as a developer into a planning commission or city council, or you're coming in as a neutral party or potentially it's even hostile,
yep.
Is there standard advice that you give to your IncDev members or just developers in general to what does the council want to hear? What's going to be persuasive? Because there's so much, that you could get up there and talk about. You could get into the details of your project. But I think that's one thing that I've thought about too. It's like, there's so much I can say. So what's the most important thing to say? What do they want to hear from me?
I think that's your first piece of homework every single time is you want to feed them what they eat, right? Which I think is an Eric Kronberg phrase. I'll attribute that to him anyway. You want to talk to them about what they want to hear about. And one of the reasons that we counsel, small developers we're training, but also our developer clients to work in one place long term is every city council is different and they change, every couple of months and they'll get spun up about something. And if you're not paying attention, it can be really easy to step on landmines. If you don't have a really good understanding of who feels what and who's mad at who about what and how it's all going. What does the city care about? What are their current challenges right now? What have they just advocated a bunch of funding for that they weren't excited about because they have some problem? You have to be really read in on the politics of your jurisdictional body in order to be successful, I think. I have only been able to do it by being really read in. Maybe that's a better way to put it. I haven't figured out a way to be successful. And even, I have lived in the same downtown for, almost 15 years. Been on the planning commission. I've chaired the construction board of appeals for 11 years. I show up to meetings. I do the things. I'm on the boards of the nonprofits. I have kids in the public school, that I can walk to from my house. I helped get our new mayor elected and I absolutely love it. It's the best ever. She's great. And I am a long-term resident, right, who is engaged. I sometimes will get busy and I haven't gone to council in a minute and we'll be taking a project through and entitling it. I had one this year that my pride came before the fall. I felt like I could take it through and it was what the city wanted. And here's all the city goals. And it's exactly, this is best case scenario, right? Like we put together a great project. It's exactly what the city goals say that they want. A year ago, I could have taken this through and it would have been, unanimous, no conversation. And I hadn't been paying enough attention and they were upset about a couple of things unrelated to us. Right. And so I took it through not being prepared. And we lost our first vote and we had to appeal it. It's the first time I've ever had to appeal something to a city council. We've taken through the only 2 annexations that have happened in my town in the last 10 years. And this was the second one. And I had to appeal it to the council because I came in a little unprepared. And it was a good reminder of it actually doesn't matter how long you've been there. It doesn't matter how well you think how they're feeling. You've had one council member change over and you haven't paid any attention to the meetings for a little while. You can get yourself in trouble.
It's been on my mind more because we actually just got a major PUD amendment. And the first time we went through on our new town, we got annexation and all the approvals and everything. One city council meeting, it was just all done. It was great.
Yeah.
And, our next city council meeting that we just went through, everything went good on that one. But I was just kind of reminded that the city council is in a place that they trust the planning commission. We're in good terms with the planning commission. We've done our work to make our relationships there, but that could all change really quick. We're grateful that there's so much unity between the two sides, but yeah, we're having elections this fall, and I'm just starting to think about that a little bit more. It's like, man, we have a lot of plans of things that we want to get approvals on that I'm just taking for granted right now because we've gotten our last two approvals, and that could all change really quick. And so wanting to start doing my homework and paying a little bit more attention to that sort of stuff.
And I think that's the benefit of a new town is you are going to be in a place a very long time, and you have the right motivation to, in our town, we had for a little while when I was on commission, Matthew Petty was on our city council, and Matt Hoffman, they're both of Pattern Zone, was on the commission with me, and Sarah Marsh, who had blue hair and is an architect and is, very cool, was on our city council. We had this very urbanist millennial planning commission council for a little while, and we could get crazy stuff through. It was good. It was projects that you guys would see and be like, yes, that's wonderful. And it was all totally illegal under our codes. And we could just get it approved. It was no big deal. And there was a little bit of a backlash to that, right? People got tired of they got over infill pressured. We had a little bit of the boomer backlash of we want this town to look the way that it did when I moved here in 1979, and it should never change.
Right.
And we got a couple of older city council members rolling on. Some of our younger ones rolled off. And we had a year or two where it was brutal getting stuff entitled. And I think it's only through those of us that got busy having kids through COVID and we're running businesses and got a little bit less involved in government, getting more involved behind the scenes. And when we knew somebody was going to be up for election, having that conversation internally. Okay, who can run for this position? We need this one. If we don't have this vote, no one is going to get any housing through in the next 2 years. We need somebody to run for this. Who can do it? Okay, who's going to fundraise for this? All right, who's going to get the word out? Who can we put up that's going to be a good, practical, knowledgeable person that's going to balance out, another vote that we lost? And so I think that kind of local political involvement is what democracy should look like when it's working well. That there are people that care, that live there, that are finding the person to do the public service, that are thinking about it in the overall balance of being good for the community and are willing to show up to the meetings.
At what level are you having those conversations? With what sort of groups are you having that conversation of, oh man, we're going to be losing this position here?
Not to sound like a broken record bragging on this group, but it's our OG IncDev cohort. We did a training here in 2017, and that's how a cohort should work. A bunch of these people were developing beforehand, right? That's, I think, a really important key here. IncDev is never the secret of anybody's success. It's a really good connection between people that are already doing cool stuff. So we've got a really good cohort of small developers here and architects and planners who, are friends, and we live together in this town and our kids play soccer together, from elected officials down to just residents thinking about who's going to go on school board. School board is going to need to build 2 new schools this year. They're going to announce those sites. We're going to need somebody that's weighing in on them not being all the way at the edge of town. Who can go and do that? It's a really integrated, and I think the thing I like the most about Fayetteville is I think it's a very healthy representative democracy that has a very involved and educated, we're a college town. We have a lot of people that care a lot. We have a lot of people that will show up to meetings, sometimes good and sometimes bad. But I think that leaning into being an active member of your place is helpful. Part of that also is just building trust by success too. That's one of the reasons that we tell small developers, you want to do a lot of little projects where you do what you say you were going to do, and it turns out the way you showed it in the renderings, and you're going to have some of them that don't. And so you need to have built enough of them that do, that people will trust you when you come forward. And when you're asking for some special permission, they know that you can trust you to do something that's pretty good because you've done 10 other pretty good things.
Speaking of where you live, Northwest Arkansas is a pretty unique place. One thing in particular with Bentonville being there and the whole Walmart economy, a lot of growth has happened in that area in the last 10, 15 years. So how much of your work are you actually doing there locally, regionally within Arkansas?
A big portion of my work has always been really local because we do a lot of master planning and entitlement. We write a lot of PZDs and lay out lots and negotiate utilities. And, we do a lot of land development, paper development is sometimes what we would call it, for clients here in Northwest Arkansas. And a lot of that is relationship based. And so there's a big chunk of our work that we do locally. realistically, for the first couple of years, all of my work was in Fayetteville jurisdictionally. If it was local to Northwest Arkansas, because we are, we're a region of 500,000. We're very fast growing. When we say that, I think people sometimes have a hard time picturing it. Bentonville had like 30,000 people that lived in it when I moved here. And we'll have 1 million people in the region in probably the next 5 to 10 years. Hundreds of people every couple of days move here. And it's a really specific market. It's a really interesting place to have landed kind of accidentally. It's also an interesting market because we have the wealthiest family in the world lives here. And we've got then all of the other people that became billionaires because they were connected to that business, right? So we have the largest trucking company in the country. We have the largest protein manufacturer in the country, right? Because they sold protein at Walmart and they were trucking stuff for Walmart.
Right.
So there's this depth of nonprofit philanthropic work that is really underlying our region. But interestingly, the vast majority of development is not enormously tied into that. Like there's lots of big office towers and big projects that happen that are tied to that. But we have, I think, one of the most robust sort of what I would call small funded, normal equity partners, bank loans, normal little deals, cohorts in the country. And there's just a lot of people doing it, right? We've got multiple new towns that are being built simultaneously across the region. We have lots of infill. We have big infill where downtowns are getting sort of wholesale replaced by 5 and 6 story buildings. And so it's a really, really interesting place. We're hosting CNU here next year. Strong Towns will be here the couple of days before that. So I'm also hopeful you guys will spend some time in the region. We're not doing everything. Not all of our ideas are good. So, definitely come with some expectations. You're going to see some really cool stuff and you're going to see some opportunities for improvement because I think we all do.
Well, it's exciting to see growth. And it's also exciting as a developer of any size, just simply having an economy that's enabling that sort of development, even if Walmart itself is not the one developing spaces. That sort of soup to just be having people flowing in. There's people to sell to. Being able to be in a region like that. Have you had any immediate lessons learned? Town planning lessons learned from seeing that type of growth happen so quickly. Have you gained any lessons from seeing a region grow so quickly and what's broken and what could have been done better?
It's one of the things that I think is one of the few fundamental philosophical differences I have with Eric Kronberg. And we're partners in a company with Elizabeth Ward Williams, who also works at KUA, that is called Incremental Code Consultants. We do incremental zoning codes for small towns. And we do a lot of work together, pre-approved plans and speaking nationally. And one of our biggest differences is they've got a total infill all the time, 100% mentality that you should never need to build a greenfield. And it took being in Atlanta with them a couple of times to understand it's because Atlanta doesn't need greenfield development often, right? Like there is so much land in Atlanta that can be infilled. And Northwest Arkansas is not like that. I mean, we had, our downtown, I'm in Fayetteville. We're 5 small towns as a region and 16 tiny ones. Fayetteville is about 90,000 people. It's relatively stable, but 2005, we had a population of 80,000 people. 1950, we had a population of 20,000 people. The primary university in the state is here, flagship university, but we are not a big town and we do have infill opportunity. And also the vast majority of our growth over the last 20 years has happened at the edges in greenfield. And so I think that is one of the reasons I feel so dedicated and impassioned to making greenfield development better is I'm seeing the infrastructure impacts of us not being very strategic about building monocultures of single family homes at the edges, right? The transportation impact on that is absolutely miserable. Your town can't build extra lanes fast enough for that not to cause a traffic problem. If you build neighborhoods where every single person needs to leave the neighborhood in a car at the same time every day and then come home at the same time every day, you've designed a neighborhood for traffic. And you don't have to, that's a choice, but we have. And so we've got all these traffic issues. Then we have all these neighbors that, are worried they don't really want commercial near them because they think commercial is Dollar General and, Mavericks gas station, Buc-ee's, if we could be so lucky. And so then the problem gets worse because they don't want commercial near them, but it means they need to drive all the way into town across the interstate to get to any of the commercial amenities. And, so we've got traffic infrastructure, road infrastructure problems is a big problem in that. We also have enormous water sewer issues from a capacity standpoint. Can I be a brief psycho about sewers? Will you?
I will allow you time.
All right. I'll try to keep it short. Sewer, it turns out I was unaware when I went to architecture school that wastewater would become one of the controlling elements that I had to be worried about to build housing. And, we just wrapped up a big project in Cape Cod, the 15 community pre-approved plans program for the entire county, Barnstable County of Cape Cod. And everything is sewer. Every single problem that we were trying to run into with town building was actually a sewer problem. It was a wastewater problem. Northwest Arkansas is somewhat the same. We're on a ridge line. As you may be familiar, water flows downhill. And so we have 16 sub-watersheds in our region of towns. And we've got a couple of regional wastewater plants, but we also have a number of small community wastewater plants. Some of the smallest towns drain their sewer to the bigger towns. So Fayetteville has a wastewater system. Springdale is just to our north. Johnson is right next to it. Half of Johnson's sewer comes to us. Half of it goes to Springdale. We also provide water to Pea Ridge, right? Like it's this weird interconnected water sewer system that is all these little towns that don't have a regional approach and none of it is planned. And when you build low density sprawl, half of your water that you put into those pipes that you have paid to treat and put into pipes, half of it drains out in leakage. That is true in most of our cities. It's pretty normal nationally too. In a low density environment, the pipes become so long in between units, the volume of pipe that you have relative to each house, right? Think about those setbacks. You now have 25 to 50 extra feet of service line. Think about the wider your lot width gets, the more infrastructure you have, pipe linear feet per house. Bella Vista and Fayetteville both, every gallon of water that they pump out from the treatment plants, half of those run through meters before they go to houses. So half of that system is leaking out at all times. Again, normal. Problematic, but normal.
What do you mean when you say half of it is leaking out?
So Bella Vista buys their water from Bentonville. So that one's a really easy one to track. It took less data searching to figure this one out. They buy a number of gallons every year from Bentonville. Bentonville sells them. I'm going to make up numbers.
Okay.
Sells them 100,000 gallons. Bella Vista turns around and sells 50,000 gallons through their meters because the city system, right? The city owns. Mm-hmm. There's no way to track how much water is leaking out where. The meter is then measuring every gallon that goes through the meter. And so you can tell how much water each house is buying, whether or not it's getting inside or leaking in the yard is a different problem. But half of the water that they buy from Bentonville is not making it to a meter to be sold to a customer. And sewer is the same problem. It's 40% instead of 50%, but 40% of sewer capacity is what's called I&I, infill and infiltration. Stormwater that's leaking into the lines is the biggest one, right? Where you've got groundwater running in or stormwater running in. People run their HVAC drainage lines, condensate lines into the system. And so every gallon of water that you put into a sewer treatment facility is the extra water you have to treat. It's all dirty water now. And so I'm going to have to look at Bentonville's population. I'll get it wrong, but it's about 50,000 people, I think. They just spent $95 million on a new sewer expansion plant that was supposed to get them capacity for the next 15 years. And they have to pay for that day one. They're bonding $95 million for a sewer expansion facility that 50,000 people are paying for new residents. They have to pay for it whether or not the new residents come. The city's on a ridge line. They have two watersheds. They put the $95 million expansion in the south one because that's the place that it had room. There is not zoning in the southern half of their city to build enough units to fill that capacity. It's not legal to build the houses that they just spent $95 million providing sewer for is problem one. But then again, these are not like Northwest Arkansas specific problems. I just know enough about Northwest Arkansas to say, like, these are problems cities are having.
Right.
They then, a year later, got a notice from their consultant, their sewer consultant, that in fact, instead of 15 years of capacity, because all of the development is lower density on that southern side, it has more I&I, they actually thought they maybe had 3 years of capacity. And so the numbers on the infrastructure costs for these small to mid-sized towns are so astronomically non-understandable. This is where you like have to get a little bit excited about Chuck and strong towns because they will keep us from going broke if we will listen to them. The multipliers that like we're asking people to pay, if we sent them a bill in the mail and we were like, do you want to pay 1/50,000th of $95 million so that you can get new neighbors? None of them would say yes. And so I think the biggest challenge that I see of a fast growing region is regional growth planning and being strategic about aligning your infrastructure planning with your soils and with your watersheds and with your sewer capacity. And so we've done some studies similar to that now in Indiana, where we're trying to help communities say, okay, where can we put new people? Let's align all that on the front end instead of just saying, whatever projects come up, we'll figure out how to connect them into the utilities and hope for the best.
I mean, this is all relevant to what we're talking about in the town building because they're all downstream of these effects, things that could affect entitlements and whatever it may be. But like we were talking about earlier, just infinitely complex as well.
Thank you for letting me totally nerd out about that for a minute. When we talk about why we vertically integrate, it's stuff like that too. Like we weren't planning on becoming experts in how wastewater works.
Right.
We had to because we had a project that was impacted by it, right? And then you like start pulling on the string and the sweater comes apart.
And you're like, this is a problem that people need to be talking about and need to understand.
Yeah.
My last question for you is what keeps you growing and expanding and doing all that you're doing? What's been the driving force behind your growth and interest, and what's keeping you motivated to keep doing this?
The thing that I find really satisfying is building places that people really love. And there's so much development and there's so much of the built world that feels so negative for so many people. You know, when we talk about those big monoculture neighborhoods, we've got people that can't, they're both working and they can't keep up with that giant yard. And we've got kids that can't ever really leave their house because, it's not safe for them to play in the front yard. They're tired of the backyard, which is just lawn, and like they can't drive, so they can't go anywhere. We've got seniors that are aging out of being able to be really active and drive a lot, but they don't have anywhere to go because we haven't built any housing for them that is in a neighborhood that they like, near the stuff that they are used to, that they could downsize into. And so I think there are so many problems in our current system, socially and environmentally and economically for a lot of communities. And I have found it so rewarding working more nationally. We talked a lot about Northwest Arkansas, but I think the other short answer to that is most of our master planning work at this point, probably 60 to 75% of our master planning work now is bigger master plans, 30 to, a couple hundred acres, are more national and they're all over. And we've done so much work via IncDev in so many states that it's easier to kind of jump in and be able to really integrate into a place. There's so many places that we go working on those problems that there are so many solvable problems. And there are so many concrete ways that you can't like fix the system overnight, but that you can noticeably make things better for people pretty quickly. And I think that kind of, work in the service of others is a way that my brother put that recently, of trying to like really phrase what he thought we had been raised as like a core value. And so it's not work in the service of others at your own expense or only some others, but that generally there is so much good that we can each be doing with almost anything that we pick. And I find that part of working within a really broken system is motivating because there is always something else that you can come in and make a positive impact on, even when you sometimes get overwhelmed by like how many different things we need to fix at once.
How has having kids affected your outlook on the work that you're doing? Because you're, of course, in the space and probably thinking about these things beforehand, but now actually having kids, has it changed your outlook on anything?
It's definitely changed the number of hours that I have available to work, which has been challenging for me as a person. I have to be home at a certain hour and make dinner, and we've got to do school pickup, and kids are sick some days. And so one of the things that I did really intentionally when I built a firm six years ago was building a workplace. And there's some of these times that you like say some of this stuff and you're like, this is going to sound more political than I mean it. I don't mean it that way. So everybody, stick with me.
Everyone calm down.
Everybody just calm down.
You're getting crazy right now. Calm down.
Everybody calm down. There's a huge attrition of women in design. So more than half of graduates are female, like 54% I think this year. less than 30% of licensed practitioners are women. We lose a big chunk getting to licensed. Less than 5% of firm owners and principals are women. And that attrition happens in the childbearing years because a lot of design firms still operate kind of like 1960s Mad Men offices, where it's assumed you can work 60 hours a week. And there's an assumption that you have somebody else buying your groceries and picking up your dry cleaning, and you can just focus on work. And that has been really negative, I think, in a lot of ways, because I think we're losing a lot of really good talent through lack of flexibility and creative thinking. And so one of the things that I felt strongly about when I started a firm and when I started hiring people was we had really non-traditional employees because we were willing to build a flexible system for them. And that was somewhat selfish because I knew I was going to need that system, but it has worked incredibly well. And it has created this really resilient and really supportive place to work where not all of our employees have kids anymore. And we have single employees that don't want to have kids. And we still have a flexibility for life and lifestyle that lets people work long term and lets us understand that there will be seasons in which we can work more and we can work less, and that we want to produce really high quality work. And we want to have a really consistent output to our clients. It's actually something we don't talk about a ton, right? We don't talk to our clients a lot about, we have work schedules and fees that we're basing on the amount of time that we are expecting somebody to be working 30 hours this week. And you're going to get a really great deliverable exactly on schedule because we've figured that all out on the back end. We're not putting that on anybody else. And that has been something that has made having a firm and having kids possible, because I don't think it would have been otherwise. We've got a team that we're willing to pitch in when somebody has the capacity this week and somebody else doesn't. We've got somebody pitching in, and we're working together in a really collaborative and supportive way, understanding that I have said this before, I think of having kids as being sort of like civic duty. Like, it's not that different from sitting on planning commission. There are things that we all have to do for the continuation of our society that are sometimes more or less always rewarding, sometimes more or less exciting. And having and raising good, thoughtful kids is one of those things that's important, I think. I don't think everybody has to do it. I don't think if you don't want to do it, you shouldn't. But I do think, like other civic engagement, it's an important thing. And it has been a really lucky and lovely part of my life that I have had a life that I get to have my kids be really involved. So, if you've been to CNU, I bet you've met my kids. I have spoken on a couple of main stages with a baby and a baby Bjorn on my chest because, they didn't want to let go. I have been at IncDev trainings in probably 15 states with a baby that was traveling with me because I was still nursing. And I've been able to shape having a life around that in a way that's not a sacrifice for them and it's not a sacrifice for me. And that, I think, is yielding more thoughtful work, right? We think about sidewalk design now that we've had a napping baby in a stroller and you just roll it across 100, rough things and wake the baby up. We think about the way that we design houses and storage differently, having been through that life phase. There's all of these things that adding diversity of experience to your team, to your consultant team is going to yield a better diversity of outcome in your built work. And so I think there's real strength in leaning into the flexibility that we need to provide to people to have a good life. And we have to get our work done, and it has to be really good. And we have to make really lovely projects that are practical and livable places that make money. And we can do that and still have a kid that's thrilled to see us when we get home.
Right. Well, we're all kind of products of our environment, the same way that you're talking about you and Eric see differently on Greenfield and Brownfield.
Yeah.
Simply Atlanta versus Fayetteville and the issues that you feel you see in your life that you want to solve. And I've thought about that a lot where, work gets really busy at times. But I'm spending so much time thinking about building a place that people want to be and live in, and that environment that's created. And I really try to make sure that I don't lose sight of, I want to create a work environment that I want to be in.
Yeah.
And hopefully there's going to be people that find the work environment that I want to be in as a work environment they want to be in also. I'm going to attract those type of people, and I'm going to build a neighborhood that I would want to live in. And I'm sure that's going to appeal to a certain group of people as well. So it's really cool to see the firm that you've created and who's attracted to that, and just the different lifestyle that Alli wants to live.
Yeah. And I think the built environment is one of the things that makes that lifestyle possible too. I want to say that out loud too, of like the privilege of getting to live in a walkable downtown. My house is 2 blocks from my kids' elementary school, and there's a grocery store. There's a locally owned natural food co-op that our firm did the entitlement and owner's rep for in between our house and house and school. And so my office is 4 blocks further back into the neighborhood. And so there's a lot of the things that we can do every day. I spend less than 5 minutes in a car every day. I can run to my kid's school and give her something that she left at home in 15 minutes between calls, like out of my desk. And so I think there's something about the built environment too to lean into. There is a quality of life that is possible in a built environment that actually incorporates all of your daily needs and in close proximity that is absolutely unbelievable. And most people don't get to have that because there's so few of them. There's so few places like that in the country.
Yeah, if you worked an hour away from where you lived and your kids' school was another 30 minutes away from there, it's like so much of the day of when you get to see your kids and spend time with your kids is gone. All that extra time is gone. The extra little touch base that you get to have as you see them when they get home from school, even if you have another call afterwards. Your life is so that flexibility, the freedom of the environment, that you have to move around and flex that time.
Yeah, and I'm not wasting hours a day in a car commuting. I'm working those hours. And I do for my young parents out there too. I also want to own. I have a nanny who's wonderful. This is not possible without one. Sometimes young parents are like, why can't I do everything? You can't. It's not possible. There's too much. And I work what I call like a second shift. So I'm usually in office, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then sometimes that last hour and a half, I'll work from home, and then kids go to sleep by 8, and I usually work again 8 to 10.
Yeah. Nice.
So I think there's some of that practicality that, you also just have to lean into, like, it won't always be like that, and it hasn't always been like that. But that's what works in the season of, a 3 and a 6-year-old. And I think one of the things that's fun about our company merger too, we've joked that our demographics are getting really thrown off. So, we sort of quietly, we're a team of 15 and we had one diversity employee. We had one dude that worked here and Rob's entire team is male. And so we're getting a much more diverse, employment crew all coming in.
It'll be balanced.
We're getting better balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We're adding all of his multifamily buildings to the catalog, and also we're getting a much better gender balance to our team.
Oh, that's great. Alli, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down, just share your thoughts. Where can people follow along with IncDev, with Flintlock, all that you're doing? Where can they find some of that information?
Probably LinkedIn is best at this point. I think we forgot to post on Instagram. We have a Flintlock Lab is our handle. I think we've forgotten to post for approximately 2.5 years. So you can find us there. We're not very active yet. LinkedIn is great, and incrementaldevelopment.org is the best place to find IncDev, but you also can feel free to just email me. We're still at flintlocklab.com, but we'll soon be rolling more fully to our range branding over the next month or two.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alli. And thank you everyone for tuning in and listening.